the next session is on LGBTQIA plus inclusion in STEM. And I'd like to invite Claire and Sarah. Yes, fantastic. As if by magic, they appeared on the screen. Isn't that brilliant? So welcome, and thank you so very much for contributing to the conference. I'm super delighted to have you on board. So if you'd like to start with introductions, and then I'll leave you the space.
Yeah, I've got some slides to kind of show some pictures of us as we introduce ourselves. So I'm just going to go ahead and share screen so everyone can see them just before we kick off. So hopefully you can see that. I'm just going to have to move things around on my screens, sorry. Can I just confirm you can see the slides? I know it's like, yes, you know, Zoom bingo that's been said, but yeah. Yeah, so my name is Dr. Claire Davis, and I use she, her pronouns, and I typically refer to myself as a gay lass, which typically simultaneously outs myself as being both from Northern England and also being queer. I myself work as a research scientist in the astrophysics group at the University of Exeter, where I use world-leading telescopes to study how stars like the sun and planets like the Earth form and evolve through time. Aside from my main role as a researcher, I'm also an outspoken advocate for greater diversity and inclusion within the field of physics and astronomy, as well as more broadly across the STEM sector as a whole. In 2018, I founded a network called Prism Exeter. That's prism as in the triangular piece of glass rather than prison as in the place you go to jail. I realized the two things sound quite similar. And that's a citywide network for STEM professionals and students who identify as LGBTQIA+, and or are interested in improving diversity and inclusion across the sector. Through Prism Exeter, I showcase the work of LGBTQIA+ scientists, technologists, engineers, mathematicians, and medics through events and other collaborative projects. And I'm happy to answer questions on any of that lot later in the session, and you're welcome to find out more in your own time using the websites and Twitter handles that will be at the bottom of all of my slides. I'll just pass you on to Sarah.
Thank you, Claire. Can you hear me, by the way?
Can hear you, yeah.
Great, that's good. I realise I haven't checked my microphone. So hello, my name is Sarah Cosgrove, my pronouns are she, her. To provide a visual description for people who need it, I am a woman with curly blue hair. I am of fair complexion but mixed Asian and white ethnicity, and I'm wearing a black dress with multiple colours of different molecules. I work for Schools Like UK as a project worker. I've been doing that for the last, so since about April this year. And as part of that, STEM has been a really good part of my, big part of my role. So I previously was a science researcher, specifically within the area of biology. That is also what I studied at university. So there's a picture of me on the left-hand side of me wearing a white lab coat and using a pipette, doing some pipetting essentially. But I found that research wasn't actually the right path for me. So I ended up going into science communication specifically, and I ended up working in STEM education. So at the moment, I work with schools in a different role with the Association for Science Education. We do an inclusion in schools project, which I could tell you a bit more about later if that's of interest to you. So I do a lot of inclusion work there. As a science communicator, I feel like inclusion is a really important part of that. So that kind of comes to my work at Schools Out UK, but also had another project which was called STEM for Queer Youth. And I also do a bit of science presenting. So there's a picture of myself on the right-hand side. This is me at Green Man Festival a couple of years ago, where I'm doing a demonstration with a volcano with a pile of soil on a table. And I feel that in science presenting and so diversity in the people I talk about is also really important. I actually show these 4 flags, so 4 of these flags in my science shows. I have the British flag because I grew up in the UK. I have the Philippine flag to recognise one of my parents who's from the Philippines, the Australian flag, which recognises the other parent from Australia. And the one that's kind of a bit newer is the asexual flag. So asexual people experience little to no sexual attraction to others, if you haven't come across that term before. And it's what I'm trying to bring into my shows. It's something that's a little bit new in terms of my science presenting. I'm going to be bringing in a science education perspective today, which I hope you will find helpful. Back to you, Claire.
Cheers. Sorry, I should have described myself as well. I'm a little bit nervous about this, so that just went out of my head. I'm a white woman. I have like short, mousy brown hair, shall we call it? I don't know, somewhere between blonde and brown. And I'm just wearing a bog standard green t-shirt at the moment. But yeah, let's get on with the show, shall we? So in the first part of our workshop together, I'm going to provide you with more of like a personal perspective and highlight the current status of LGBTQ plus STEM representation outside of the classroom, in the hope that you'll kind of be convinced of the need for an LGBTQ plus inclusive STEM curriculum within the classroom. And I want you to come on a journey with me, first of all, through my search for visible LGBTQ plus people in STEM. And a personal connection to scientists, really. Now, I did all of my schooling in the UK, and I'm currently 32. So thanks to Section 28, there wasn't any LGBTQ plus content in any of my schooling. I came out as gay in year 10, which, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the UK schooling system, was when I was about 14. A few of my other colleagues and classmates that were in my year, they came out as gay or bi later on in school and college, but there were certainly no out teachers while I was at school. And it was a similar case when I went to university. I joined the LGBTQ plus society, or just LGBT plus society as it was at the time, alongside a few others, even on my physics course. But there were no out lecturers and no other more senior academics in my field. And there was certainly no talk of prominent LGBTQ plus physicists in any of our lecture material. When I moved to St Andrews to undertake my PhD in 2011, I was finally met with someone more senior than myself who was out. On the slide is a picture of Dr. Chris Hooley. He's a theoretical physicist and a really rather wonderful gay man. He's pictured next to a sign that says, "Today is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science," and his favorite female scientist is Emily Noether. He's pictured smiling with his mustache, short, kind of dark brown hair, glasses, kind of typical physicist getup, I guess. You've got a bow tie, waistcoat, standing very, very formally and very, very happy in front of this poster. But he was the only one that I knew. And I wouldn't find other LGBTQIA plus people in STEM until I was at least 24. And when I did, it was because of discussions in the news and the media about the man pictured on this slide. This is Alan Turing. Alan Turing had been a cryptographer and mathematician during the early to mid 1900s. He's pictured in typical 1940s getup of very brown on brown jacket, shirt and tie, with his hair coiffed to the side. I heard and read commentaries about his life and even watched the film The Imitation Game, which explained that he had been a gay man, had developed the Enigma machine, which decoded encrypted messages being sent by the Nazis during World War II, and that he died from cyanide poisoning. These stories at the time weren't clear on whether this was suicide or an accidental overdose. This was seemingly appearing in the news at the time because of campaigns to pardon him of his crimes of what was classed as gross indecency, which I'm saying in inverted commas. And that was on account of him being gay. So here was this LGBTQ plus person in STEM from history that I was finally reading about and finding out about. And I was simultaneously finding out that my government had chemically castrated him. He was somehow simultaneously being celebrated as a war hero, but persecuted for being himself. And this kind of just reinforced at the time the idea that was growing in my head as becoming a scientist, that there would have to be a division between my work life and my personal life in order for me to succeed and be celebrated as a scientist. At the same time, I did what every LGBTQ person probably does, and I turned to the media as well, and queer media at that, in search of current LGBTQ plus people in STEM. One of the places I looked each year was the Pink List, which was a list of 100 influential LGBTQ plus people compiled at the time by the Independent newspaper. Browsing through the 2013 list, which is the year that the law pardoning Alan Turing was passed, we're going to get some audience participation in this bit, but if you type in the chat, how many people working across STEM fields do you think were recognized in the pink list in 2013? We've got a suggestion of 0 at the moment. Does anybody else have any suggestions? We've got a suggestion of 2, 3. Okay, so the answer was 1, sort of. And that kind of depends on whether you count psychology and social sciences within STEM, classically. And I don't know, I hope you find this disappointing. I certainly did. And maybe you're thinking, but this was 2013. Surely there's more people in STEM now, more people in recent lists than now that we have kind of near daily updates about the climate crisis, for one thing, and the coronavirus epidemic. And our world is dominated by technology. So I thought we'd have a game. So this again is a lot of audience participation. So we're going to have a game of play your gay cards right, which is a take on the classic TV or UK TV game show, Play Your Cards Right, which was originally fronted by Bruce Forsyth and recently relaunched in Alan Carr's epic game show on ITV. I'm also giving quite a crude nod to all the times, oh, you dropped your gay card, was uttered as a playground jipe, insult, whatever, at my old high school as well, so kind of reclaiming that. So the aim of the game on the TV show was to guess whether the next playing card in a sequence was going to be higher or lower than the one shown already. So I really hope you're ready for audience participation in this. Now the pink list has evolved through the years to become the rainbow list and then the pride power list, but each list still aims to compile 100 of the most influential LGBTQ+ people. We know that there was one person from STEM in the 2013 list. So on screen it's represented by an ace of diamonds. Ace is clearly low in this setting. Now, do you think as an audience that the number of people from STEM in the 2014 list was higher or lower than 1? Again, you can type in the chat. Okay, we've got a lot of people thinking quite negatively about this. So there's a lot of votes of lower coming through on the chat, a couple of higher, a couple of same as well. So it was higher. There were a whopping 4 people from STEM in the 2014 list. I can see Sarah dancing with some thumbs up symbols. So what about 2015? Do you think that we continued the successful trend? Do you think the number of people in STEM in the 2015 list was higher or lower than 4? Again, you can type your guesses in the chat. Okay, we've got quite a mix again. Got some cheers, but some exclamation marks for higher as well. Okay, quite a mix. Okay, it was lower. We were back down to 1 again. So what about 2016? Do you think the number of people in STEM was higher or lower than 1 in 2016? I've got some begs that it was higher now. Okay, it was the same. So we're stuck at 1. So you know the drill by now. Do you think 2017 was higher or lower? Promise this doesn't continue for too much longer. Again, quite a mix of lower and higher. Okay, so we're back up to 2 for this. Claim of optimism coming through in the chat as well. So there were 2 people from STEM in the 2017 list. What about 2018? Do you think it was higher or lower than 2? Again, some begs for higher. Okay, you'll be happy. It was higher. Not reaching the highs of 2014, but we're back up to 3 this time around. So did we again continue this much slower trend in 2019, do you think? What about the 2019 list? Do you think it was higher or lower than 3? Okay, some interesting questions which we'll come to later, maybe on in the discussion about who decides on this list and why it goes up and down. But the answer for 2019 was 2. You'll be glad to know that's the end of the audience participation. The situation is pretty much the same in 2020 and 2021. So TV doctors, Dr. Raj Singh and Dr. Ronks were consistent between 2020 and 2021, and they were accompanied in respective years by tech executive Anthony Watson and chief auditor Vincent Francois. So as Prism Exeter, which is this LGBTQ plus STEM network that I said I run, I wanted to do something about this. In 2019, we as a group, we ran a competition for university, college and sixth form students in and around the Exeter area to champion the life and work of an LGBTQ plus person from STEM. In particular, we challenged them to find somebody other than Alan Turing, who at the time was still appearing in the news every now and again as there was a discussion about him potentially being chosen as the person to appear on what is now the Bank of England £50 note, which you will have noticed if you've seen a £50 note maybe, that this has happened. So the entrants to the competition submitted a short text entry explaining who they wished to champion and why. And our eventual winners nominated lesbian astronaut Sally Ride, trans botanist Elka Mackenzie, and the inventor Nikola Tesla, whose letters to and writings on his admirers were discussed in the context of asexuality. The competition entrants were invited to present short talks about the person they had been championing at a celebratory event held at the University of Exeter for LGBTQ plus History Month in 2019. And the images shown on screen are snapshots of Nikola Tesla, Sally Ride and Elka Mackenzie. Elka and Nikola are both shown in black and white. And Sally Ride is pictured smiling in her astronaut getup. Next to that is a picture of all the competition winners. They're showing their certificates. And they're shown with an LGBTQ plus person from STEM, Izzy Jayasinghe, who works at the University of Sheffield, who was giving an introduction to the event and presented them with their certificates. We took a break from organising the competition last year, but we're teaming up with Devon and Cornwall based LGBT plus charity, the Intercom Trust, to run this competition again for students in and around the Exeter area this academic year. Again, students will be challenged to champion an LGBTQIA plus person from STEM who isn't Alan Turing. On the left, we show our draft flyer, which says queer science competition, cash prizes for the winner, and it's got a black man with rainbow flags painted on his cheeks, shouting through a megaphone, which shows a bunch of science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine symbols coming out of the megaphone. We're going to get the entrants this year to provide either word entries, written entries, or TikTok entries, so they can show it by video or by text. And again, the winners will be invited to speak at a celebration event, once again held at the University of Exeter. The only difference this time being that they can nominate somebody to speak on their behalf if the idea of speaking in front of a bunch of people isn't necessarily a celebration or a prize to them, really. But the main reason I kind of wanted to bring this up is to kind of inspire other areas of the country to kind of do a similar thing, that you can give the task of finding these people to the students who probably have more time than the teachers, to be honest with you, to find these people. Yeah, the idea is that we hope to open the eyes of young people to the opportunities that STEM careers provide them, and allow them, and particularly their influencers, the sphere of influence, their families, their friends, their educators, to actually see that opportunities in STEM are open and welcoming to LGBTQ plus individuals. So with that, I don't know if we want to have like a brief Q&A rather than handing straight over to Sarah, but that was the end of my slides. Don't know what you want to do, Lila.
Would it be best maybe if I share my slides and then see if there's any
we can go with that.
I'll just get mine up. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm just going to get the chat box up as well so I can see it. Great, thank you so much, Claire. And it's really great to hear about your personal experiences, just thinking about your journey into science and kind of thinking along the way how you, in terms of you came across your first queer scientist, you know, and at what point that was and how late that is, considering how long your educational route was. So I'm going to be talking about the young, sort of thinking from a young person's perspective and thinking from an education perspective. I have noticed that the Q&A box does have a couple of things in actually that's just been asked, and whether we wanted to answer those questions now actually. So Claire, there's a question which says, are you putting the competition entries together as a resource for people to draw upon?
Yes, so there are resources on our website, which is prismexeter.com, and oh, it's disappeared from the, I can't see it anymore. Anyway, yes, so they will be available as a resource. They tend to get written up after the event, and we also have speakers events. There's actually one happening on the 17th of November in Exeter, but also online, and those are recorded, so you can see LGBTQ plus people from STEM actually talking about their work, their experiences, and they're on the Prism Exeter YouTube channel as well. So they're available as a resource, yes.
There is a question, another question here, which I was wondering if we can answer it after mine, because I would also like to answer this question. It's a really nice question, actually. And I also noticed somebody in the chat has asked for your email address, Claire. So
cool, yes, okay. I will drop that in, yeah.
I think that is all the questions for now. So I will carry on with my side of things. So as I mentioned, I was going to talk about the young person's perspective. And I did a survey a couple of years ago. I basically did some talks over a whole day, and the young people who were attending were sitting in small groups on tables, and I asked them to list as many scientists that they could. And I pulled them all together into an Excel spreadsheet because like data, essentially. And I ranked them on how often they were mentioned, and then also looked at the demographics. So out of the 149 scientists that were mentioned in this, 12 were women. 7 are Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, to what we know. 6 are disabled, to what we know. 2 are LGBTQIA plus, to what we know. 6 were fictional, and 130 of them were white men. And here's kind of what young people are seeing. This is what we tend to portray as scientists. We tend to see them as cis, white, able-bodied, neurotypical, middle-class men, don't we? If we look at the science curriculum, we see a lot of white men scientists. We tend to see people like Darwin, we see people like Mendeleev, we see people like Bohr, and they have to remember these names and their concepts because of, for example, answering exam questions. What was actually quite encouraging about the survey is they were listing their teachers as well, because sometimes we forget about science teachers being scientists themselves. So that was an encouraging thing. But when you look at the demographics, it kind of says everything about the image of science. And there are similar activities where you draw a picture of a scientist and you ask young people to draw a picture of a scientist. These were drawn by 11 to 14-year-olds. And as you can see, a lot of lab coats, safety goggles, but again, a lot of white men, really. And this is the thing, we got this image of science of who does the science, but also stereotypes of what a scientist is as well. So the fact that science seems to always seem to happen in a lab, but it's not true. Science has existed before labs existed, and now people do science outside of labs and without lab coats as well. And so I saw something that was said earlier about the perceptions of STEM. The perceptions of what young people think is STEM as well is kind of another thing. It's about like, what are the different jobs and careers you can go into with these subjects? And actually, as again, sort of thinking about those stereotypes of these. So when we're talking about inclusion within the curriculum, there's this perspective, which is about young people seeing science for themselves. And one of the questions mentions science capital, so I can come back and address that a bit later. But I wanted to also show another side of things as well. And this is thinking about the young people who then go on to do science and technology type of careers. An example I've got here is somebody designed some AI facial recognition a couple of years ago and claimed that the facial recognition could tell if you're gay. Now, first of all, I'm dubious that this works because how would that work? That's massively relying on stereotypes. But also too, why did somebody decide to design something like this? Why should this be a research question? Why should this be a bit of technology that's developed? With STEM, STEM is about creating solutions, it's problem solving and creating things and finding things that benefit people. And this is not benefiting people. This is actually doing quite the opposite and is very dangerous. If I show you another example, this is from some research of Antarctica explorers when they first started going to Antarctica. And there was an explorer, somebody who's there on the research team, George Levick, and he was observing the behavior of penguins. And it was probably one of the first accounts of penguins. And the research was brought back to the UK, but he omitted some of the research out, which included same-sex behavior. In fact, he was so just basically disgusted by it that he wrote it in Greek in his notes. So as a hidden coded message. So it was recorded, but it was kept away from the public. And it was only the Natural History Museum found it a few years ago and found this research. And so he's going into this research and looking at science from a very heteronormative lens. But the other thing is that you're also having here is that you're not seeing the full beauty of science. And as a biologist, I see that's such a shame. You're not seeing the full breadth of it and the full perspective of it. So there's LGBTQIA plus inclusion from making sure that young people feel like the subject's for them. But when they actually go on to STEM careers, it's about thinking about when they are doing that work, who is that going to be impacting? What are they going to be finding? Are they seeing the full perspectives within their field if they only bring a heteronormative lens to it? However, I know that you're here because you know it's important to do inclusion in education. But I do want to talk about the challenges. And I'm talking about this from somebody who has experience of working particularly with English secondary schools, but this will probably apply to wherever you are joining from. The first one I hear from teachers all the time is time. This is something I'm finding particularly at the moment as schools are catching up, so dealing with the effects of COVID over the last couple of years and still the ongoing impact now. This is something I'm seeing that schools have less and less time, like they have less and less time. And so this is something I do recognize. The second thing is curriculum restriction. If you have to teach the national curriculum, especially thinking about examinations at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, so GCSE and A-level, thinking about England, this will therefore make you feel like, well, maybe I can't stray too far from the curriculum because I need them to know what they need to know. The pupils need to know what they need for the exam. And so that can be a restriction for you. And then there's the confidence, if you are not as familiar with LGBTQIA identities, and then the resources to do it as well. Actually, are there existing resources out there that I can use so I don't have to spend too much time developing my own? And so I'm hoping that with the resources and the guidance I'm about to go through, that they will help address some of these things. But it is fair to say that it is challenging. And what I hope to do is give you places to start. You may have already done this work already, but get you thinking about the next steps beyond that too. So, starting points. Let's talk about displays. Science departments, because I mainly work with science teachers, they love having displays in a department. And if you do have a display featuring scientists, just make sure that is a diverse range of scientists. And it's also important not to have a diversity board and a science board separately. You know, these are scientists, they're all scientists at the end of the day, so they should be included as part of that. Maybe you might have an LGBTQ plus display somewhere else in your school, let's say during LGBT History Month, where you might have some people in there. Why not include scientists as part of that? So those are a couple of ways of doing things. And then making sure that scientists are featured in the curriculum. Now, a way in which you can do this, and as again, thinking from a British perspective, is the Gatsby benchmarks. So these are a series of benchmarks. If you've not come across them, there are 8 of them. That means that you have a broad careers provision in your school. So things like workplace visits, CV writing, mock interviews, and so on. And there's one benchmark, Gatsby benchmark 4, which is about embedding into the curriculum. And so this is where schools tend to score a bit lower. But if you were to embed careers into the curriculum on a regular basis, it can improve your score, but also means that young people have regular thinking about the perspectives, the stereotypes of STEM careers and what they could be, showing them a broad range of careers over a long period of time, so as early as Key Stage 3 to up to Key Stage 4 and then 5. And so it's not just for options evening, but an opportunity for you to embed people into the curriculum as well, so you can have that diversification there too. So I've got 3 examples here. You've got George Washington Carver in his work on agriculture, Alan Hart and Sarah Josephine Baker, who both work in public health. These 3 people on Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia is not perfect. It's not necessarily super diverse, but it means that young people can access this knowledge, which is really, really nice. And it is something that is getting better, and you can access this knowledge on there. There's also sites like Queer Bio as well that do a similar sort of thing. But there are also living people, plenty of living people. I mean, Claire and I are examples of that. On the right-hand side, there is a logo which says 500 QS. This is for 500 queer scientists, and this is a website of more than 500, I think, at this point, LGBTQIA plus scientists. And you can search on there for different, so let's say different aspects of biology. I see that somebody loves this website already. I love it too, because it's just full of so many people. They often have social media handles on there so you can follow their work. Maybe if they are open to it, you can contact them, maybe to, let's say, talk to your students virtually. On the left-hand side, I have a logo that looks like an atom with different colors of the rainbow. And this is for this is for LGBT STEM Day, which is on the 18th of November, and there's organizations like Pride in STEM, there's also House of STEM, there's lots of different LGBT organizations which have networks, so very much like PRISM, have networks of people in STEM, and they try to highlight them through days like LGBT STEM Day. So basically there's lots of people out there. And then at my work at Schools Out UK, I've also been developing lesson resources as well. This is where you're going to find them on the website, but what I'll do while we're doing the Q&A is give you a direct link to this, but it's under PSHE. And I'll just walk you through what each of them look like. So on the very first slide, you have the curriculum links. So you know where you can embed it into the curriculum. And as I've got mentioned there, Gatsby Benchmark 4, because that's also, we'll tick that box. And it's specified here that these are in line with the English and Welsh science curriculum. And then I have an example of a slide here. This is Dr. Anna Brzezinski. There's a picture of her on the right and some text on the left-hand side that describes her. And then in this slide deck, I try to, as wherever possible, also bring the identity to their work. So in her case, she wrote a book and she talked about her experiences while she was at school. And then I have a practice question. So the one I have on the screen is a Key Stage 4 question about density. And I try to link it into their particular job or somebody like them. So I talk about material scientists generally here, rather than specifically Dr. Anna Brzezinski's job. And then the other thing you can go on to next, so you've got the thinking about diversification in the curriculum, and then starting points for that could be things like LGBT History Month, but really it's about doing it on a regular basis so they get that regular visibility. But then you start to go into things like looking at heteronormative perspectives in science. So thinking about examples used in this context are things like language. So this is from the Gender Inclusive Biology website. The website's great. It's got a load of stuff on it, resources like this. And it's trying to get teachers to think about teaching biology in a more inclusive way. So examples from here is, so you've got male, female hormones, which is something we might say. And instead you could replace it with talking about the specific hormones. So testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. And so it's not just focusing on male, female. And if you remove that aspect, then it is a lot more inclusive and is a lot more specific as well. And I got lots of other examples, including this. So I really liked this particular resource because you can see language across the science curriculum in different ways. So although this is talking about so trans and cis, so thinking about gender identity, but you could also take this across to molecules, so thinking about chemistry, but also physics as well, which is nice because then you have a better understanding of what the words mean as well. We are also working on a resource at the moment with a maths teacher who actually came to the session I ran in the summer for Pride in Education. Really grateful to be able to work with him. He did a lesson on flags and shapes within flags, and he included some LGBTQIA plus flags as part of that. which is really cool because he got to talk about the flags as well as talk about the maths with them, and he did it as a revision session. So we're hoping to build some math resources. Again, it's just about embedding it in. I think it's really important not to see it as an add-on, because I think inclusion can be treated like that sometimes. So if you try to include it in wherever possible, it's kind of about that as a long-term approach, and finding places to start by using these resources can help you. But as I said, it's that thinking about that long-term thing of it's just been part of the curriculum and it's kind of always been there. And I just see, yeah, I agree. It's about having a gay lesson, but embedding it. It's about embedding rather than here's a special lesson and then we move on from that, really. And then finally, student voice. I think this is really important with any kind of inclusion work that we do, because it's about the students at the end of the day. It's about what are they experiencing? What are they looking for? What is it they want to see? And that can help you inform your curriculum, but also if you make any changes, it's important to find out if it's working, because sometimes we might do something because we think, oh, student voice is a topic of the next workshop. Oh, well, then my job there is done. But basically, it's really important because when we change something, it's important to know it works. Just because we think something is good doesn't mean that in practice it will necessarily be as effective, or there could be ways you could still improve it, especially if you're doing something new. But this is something I see is really important in the inclusion work that I do, whether that's at Schools Like UK or at the Association for Science Education. So that is me. Thank you so much for listening. I just wanted to mention a couple of things before I finish off. Here is my email address, and also here's my Twitter handle. So projectofficer@schools-out.org.uk. And then my Twitter handle is @Sarah_Cosgriff, spelled COSGRIFF. I have an event on Wednesday, the 17th of November, featuring 3 people who are LGBTQIA+ in STEM. And they will be sharing their work and their perspectives of why this inclusion in schools is important. So for example, we have somebody talking from a Section 28 perspective of her experiences with Section 28. There'll also be somebody who will be talking about the inclusion in biology teaching, and then somebody talking about sort of climate change comms. So the event details are not online yet, but they will be going up on Tuesday next week. So if you want me to email you them, please do. And I also am doing a project with the Association for Science Education. It's about inclusion in schools, and we're working with secondary schools in England, state schools as well. If that's something that you might be interested in, if you're doing inclusion work, please do get in touch. But I should note that there are some specifications on which schools can qualify, so I can't guarantee that your school will qualify for it. That is it from me. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to look at this first question that we have, Claire. So the Aspire Science Capital research from UCL suggests that children recognize if science is for them by age 11, year 6. And actually, I would say that's what the research says. It's probably a lot earlier. What was it while you were in primary school that motivated you to aspire to a career in STEM? Claire, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I've heard it being recognized as aged 8. Which is even younger, so that'll be year 2, year 3. So even earlier than age 11. Science is kind of always interesting. You have data, and then on top of that, you have a person interpreting that data. And I would actually say that this data has potentially been misinterpreted. I would say that these children have been put off by age 8, not they have failed to be included by age 8. It's similar to kind of that whole idea of like generating discriminating thoughts, I suppose. It's like that has to be a learned idea. So I would say that I just wasn't put off. I mean, you could argue across the board that I didn't necessarily fit in to different things at school. So that never put me off if I was the only one who enjoyed something. I was kind of used to that from a rather young age. So it wasn't necessarily what motivated me to aspire to a career in STEM. It was just that nobody told me I couldn't, I guess, which I think is important to consider. Yeah.
That's an interesting answer. Mine's quite different. Well, yeah, I think it is. So basically, both my parents came from STEM backgrounds. And so I remember being given books from a young age, like horrible science books, if you remember those, because the horrible history books were very popular at the time when I was a kid. And I also had the How My Body Works series. It was like a white booklet that you can get from the newsagent, and it came with a video. And I remember there was cartoons of how the body worked. And I remember learning about platelets and then it coming up in the curriculum. And I already knew what they were because of that. My mum came from a chemistry background and my dad more from a biochemistry, agriculture, but basically both of them worked in food production, which is where they met. And so because of knowing them as scientists, so if I happen to be good at science, I'm like, well, I know where I got it from, which is it's massively stereotyping. But basically, I saw it as, well, if I'm good at science and my parents are scientists, then that makes sense in my head. And therefore, I kind of saw science as for me. But when I was in sixth form, I actually was trying to apply for medicine, because that's the other problem with sort of the stereotypical STEM routes and seeing out, oh, these are the only, this is what you could do with science. I didn't really consider lots of other options, and I really wish I could have been able to do that. But I ended up doing biology because it was like my backup option, and that's how I fell into biology really as a subject. But the science I struggled with at school was actually physics. I don't remember why, but I really struggled with physics when I was 16. And now it's very interesting because I now work in inclusion work specifically around underrepresentation in physics. And so I kind of go in with that perspective of, okay, this is something I wasn't so interested in at school. And I think one of the issues with physics, I think it has in particular, is it's put on this pedestal of being a really hard subject. It's the clever science. It's you've got to be really, really clever to do it, which is why at A level, you find that when with A level physics, 20% of those who take A level physics are girls. And the ones who do take it tend to be high performing girls, whereas with boys, they don't necessarily have to be super high performing to do it. So it's kind of, so there's a little bit of that, is a subject for me, am I good enough as a subject? That can also provide those barriers in. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit more. But yeah, for me, it was just, I was always good at science. My parents were scientists, so I always kind of saw it for me.
Yeah, it's interesting then that you mentioned like your access to what's typically considered science capital. So that idea that you knew scientists as well. I didn't have that. So my parents are kind of in the accounts area.
Right.
But my mum's fascinated by art history. She did some like adult education courses like whilst I was a teenager. There's been a wide breadth of education, and I suppose all they did was kind of encourage me to learn. I looked at doing either physics or history at uni, and it wasn't really until I spoke to people at uni that I found out that you could actually be a scientist as a job. It wasn't just something to learn, which is what I kind of wanted to do with my uni. So
that's so interesting, because usually, that's so interesting, because of the idea of like science, learning the science rather than, whereas I think, but then again, it's like that in terms of knowing the different careers options for scientists though. Yeah. That's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, I knew it would make me employable, and so I just thought I'd enjoy the time learning. Yeah,
it's really interesting because I know somebody else who had the choice between science and history, and they went for the science route because they saw it as employable, which I think is a shame, because I think that history has employable routes as well. I think they're just lesser well known when you're at that age.
Yeah, and maybe the historians at the universities need to make that as a point when you go around open days, because the scientists certainly do.
Yeah, so, I think science departments like doing that. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any more questions that people would like to ask? Lyle, I see you've come on screen. Hello.
I can't see any more questions. I really loved your session. I've been tweeting about it like there's no tomorrow. I absolutely loved it. I think growing up, and I'm in my early 50s, there was absolutely zero representation. Like I totally agree. And it's really sad to see that the kids today still view a scientist as cis men, probably het as well. It's really sad. And as I was saying in the chat, you cannot be what you cannot see. So representation really, really matters. And I think if you want young people to aspire to be anything they want to be, then that's really crucial work. I'm really enjoying this session actually, because my curriculum background is in ESOL and EFL. So I'm not very knowledgeable in terms of STEM, but I've learned so much. I'm really genuinely grateful.
I've got like a one last thought, I guess. It's also, we have to consider, and we've got this with other demographics, is the history of science with LGBTQ plus people. It's not just the people who've been doing it, but also how science has studied us. as well. So I've been, for example, looking at how people research asexuality. And there was a really great podcast episode by Queer Science who looked into this recently with some ace scientists. And they were talking about how they kind of measure like who's asexual in the study. And it's one of those things you can't really quantify because it's identity. And so when doing science research or research in general on different LGBTQIA plus groups, you have to make sure it's considerate of the community. And I don't know if the science is always thinking about us, you know. So
there was also that recent study that proved that bisexuality in men exists. So it's like you can't just, you know, listen to people, and there has to be some kind of quest to prove something. And I don't think things like that need proving, and that just doesn't help.
Just looking at the comments, Kevin is saying history is employable. I am a history graduate. Great comments and insights, Sarah and Claire. Fascinated as to how we get more women to study physics. Kevin is from Pearson, and if you want to come on screen and comment, you're very welcome, Kevin. It's been useful. Yes. What is Pearson going to do about representation in STEM? Let's put you on the spot.
Yeah, great. And that was a really fascinating comment you made, Sarah, about how physics is put on a pedestal, and is that discouraging women in some way, and what is going on there to start? I think we really need to nail this, because how are we going to get a better balance, representation in STEM, and then that will help us in the journey. But let's please pick this up, because I think you've raised some, Claire and Sarah, you've raised some really great comments and insights, and I'd be really interested in reaching out and exploring how we can make some progress here.
If you are interested, sorry, Sarah, if you are interested in this as well, so the Institute of Physics have released quite a large pot of money for what they call the Challenge Fund, which is available to apply for to try and, shall we say, solve the problem of underrepresentation of women, of ethnic minorities, of LGBTQIA plus people across the board. So if you have any ideas, then have a look at that.
Claire, if you send it to me, I can pass it on to Kevin, or just do an introduction. And I was going to say, I love working with teachers because they are so good with timing, like 11:15, boom shakalaka, boom boom, right on time. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for both your input. Sarah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the last thing I was just going to say to Kevin is that, so I work for Association for Science Education. Our projects recently moved over from the Institute of Physics, but we worked on improving gender balance in physics for a number of years, and we have a number of reports as well. So we've done a lot of work on it. So if you want to find out a bit more about what our team does, we're funded by the Department of Education as well. So I'm going to put my ASE email in the chat. So please get in touch with me.
Thanks, Sarah. Will do. Thanks.
And thank you for having us.
Great session.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah, I love the fact that you made the link to Learn a Voice, because that's the purpose of the next webinar with Lewis. So that was like so spot on. Like I couldn't have planned it any better if I had wanted to.